What's the statute of limitations on, on French crime? My name is Curren Sheldon, and I'm a documentary filmmaker and cinematographer. Well, I first started getting into documentary for more than anything else just because I wanted access to really interesting worlds. And after grad school, I started writing for a travel company in 2010, 2011. And I decided after just a few years of doing that I'd rather do video. And really as a way to be outside and to travel the world and meet interesting people and just actually sort of experience life a little bit more. And so I actually use sort of documentary and filmmaking as a way to kind of live the life that I wanted to live. I just started really loving the storytelling process and being able to relay the stories of ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. And so sort of my love for documentary and filmmaking specifically has just really grown from there. One of my most recent films is called King Cole, which was directed by my wife, Emmy-winning Sheldon, and it marries sort of the documentary verite filmmaking that we've been doing for the past decade with a more magical realism imagination of a region, Appalachia. And the film speaks to how coal has a very cultural hold on Appalachia, but more specifically West Virginia, where both my wife and I are from. She wanted to create a film that not only showed sort of the cultural integration of coal through things like coal fun runs and coal beauty pageants, but also reimagine a future for the region post-coal. And so that's where we implemented a lot of sort of magical realism elements and sort of created these two characters, these two young girls that take us through the potential of the region, both culturally, economically, and everything that's in its future. So it's sort of a different way to make a documentary, but it was received really well, and it was just a lot of fun to film, and yeah, love the way it turned out. I would say kind of what I've made a name for myself, or what I've really tried to become really good at in the past, is verite filmmaking. And so reacting intuitively to what's happening on camera in a scene at the moment and be able to capture that in the most cinematic way possible is what I really love to do. In a lot of ways, I think it's almost better to be smaller, be more intimate, and capture a better story than just, acting like it's a giant Hollywood production. And so I still kind of like that small crew, small team, capture things as they happen. If you miss it, that's your own fault. So that's the way I like to work. But for any verite doc, you're finding most of the final story in the edit. That's for sure. About 2 years ago, a little over 2 years now, I started a YouTube channel. I just love, obviously, the filmmaking process, but also the equipment and gear that I use. I have a real passion for it. And so I thought it'd be a fun way to share kind of what I've learned over the past 12 years in the industry and shooting documentaries. I think for a lot of people who live in LA or New York or Atlanta or bigger markets, they have access to a lot more equipment and gear, whereas in West Virginia, I do not. And so I either need to rent things and test things out for future projects, and the YouTube channel allows me to do that. I love making my own films kind of when I want, how I want. And if you're waiting around for funding for projects, especially now, things are a little more difficult. And the fact that the channel allows me to potentially get sponsors on videos and then go make the films I want to make is, kind of the dream in a lot of ways. I'll get emails every week of people just asking me, tips on how to get started in their documentaries, or the best lens or equipment to use. It's nice to be able to give to people what I didn't have when I was, starting out. So before I started my latest feature film, I tested out a range of lenses, and the Otis ML was one of those I tested out alongside Cooks, Typox, DZO lenses, and the ZEISS Nano Primes, specifically the Otis 50mm. When I put that lens on and I played it back on a computer, I was just absolutely blown away by the results. As soon as I saw that footage, I was like, these are the lenses I need for this feature film. So we got the Otis 50 and 85, and now with the 35mm on, we have a wider angle to capture some of those big moments, which is really exciting. The detail, the contrast, the pop that comes off these lenses is just some of my favorite images I've ever shot. I would say by far my favorite focal length is 50mm. I often use 35 just because it gives me, especially in documentary where you're not really sure what's going to happen, it gives you a little bit more leeway to capture everything in the frame that's actually going on. But if I know I'm going to have a little bit of extra space and can move back or move forward, then I'll almost always use a 50 if possible. And then I also find myself reaching for a wider angle just to get that sort of big, like here's the entire scene that we want to see, whether that's a 18 or 21 millimeter. And every time I put an 85 millimeter on though, especially the Otis 85 millimeter, the footage just looks perfect. So anything that is two characters talking and I know they're not going to move for a little while, then I will put on an 85 to capture those tighter and sort of more cinematic moments. And so yeah, it's a little bit of mix of everything on how we prep and shoot those particular projects. When you're a documentary filmmaker, you always find yourself in interesting situations. I did a feature documentary about professional boxers in Appalachia, which is a very DIY world with a ton of great big characters. So suddenly you find yourself alongside a boxing ring at the Mohegan Sun with your Kentucky boxer fighting the greatest boxer in the world. And then last summer, we were doing a feature doc on an Olympic runner. And we didn't really have access to film at the Olympics, so we actually forged tickets on our phone and was able to creep down to the very front row of the stadium in France. I took just a C70 with a small lens, and so they let me in somehow. I was actually surprised because the Alexa Mini was our other camera, and we're like, that's not gonna work. So yeah, that's kind of the cool thing about documentaries is you have access to worlds and places that you otherwise wouldn't.